usually, when we think about government power, we picture these very physical things, right? Like marble buildings in capital cities or, fortified military bases, maybe the police cruisers patrolling our neighborhoods.
Right, yeah. The architecture of authority has always been something you can literally point a finger at.
Exactly. It occupies physical space. It's tangible. You can stand right in front of it, map it out, and see exactly where the boundaries of that power lie.
Yeah, but when you step into the world of modern data architecture, that whole marble building concept just vanishes. We are looking at this landscape of power that is entirely invisible.
Right, and it's operating constantly, just running in the background of your life.
It is the absolute definition of a silent infrastructure. I mean, it sees everything, but you can't see it at all.
Which is wild, and
Yeah.
that's exactly why today we are doing a deep dive into a really dense, highly critical essay by the writer José Benegas. He is analyzing this newly published list of 22 theses released by Palantir Technologies.
Yeah, and that text is actually extracted from the book, The Technological Republic, by Palantir's CEO, Alex Karp, and Nicholas Samiska.
Great. And before we get into it, we need to make something very, very clear.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we are navigating some incredibly charged political and philosophical territory today. And our goal here is definitely not to endorse or take sides on Benegas's critique, nor are we, passing judgment on Palantir's corporate politics or their philosophy.
Yeah, we're not here to tell you who is right or wrong.
Exactly. We are simply mapping out the ideas presented in this specific article. We just want to impartially break down the argument Benegas is making in the source material so you can fully grasp the scope of his critique.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand why Benegas is sounding the alarm, we first need to know who we are talking about, right? Like, what actually is Palantir?
Well, Benegas essentially describes it as the functional technological infrastructure of Big Brother.
Wow.
It's an American company founded back in 2003 by Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and a few others. And honestly, the name itself is a massive clue.
Right, the Tolkien reference.
Exactly. In J.R.R. Tolkien's universe, the Palantiri are these mystical seeing stones that allow whoever's using them to view events from afar.
So they literally named their company after a fictional instrument of total surveillance.
Pretty much, yeah. And today, Palantir sells data intelligence software to governments, the military, the CIA, police departments, and, massive corporations.
And they're taking in these huge, heterogeneous streams of data, right?
Well, absolutely everything. Your financial records, social media activity, satellite imagery, medical histories, migration patterns, and they integrate all of it. The ultimate goal is to allow an analyst to track individuals, anticipate their movements, and make these real-time decisions on a totally unprecedented global scale.
Which is a staggering amount of power. And you can see exactly how they justify that kind of sweeping surveillance in this new manifesto of 22 theses.
Yeah, and that brings us to Benegas's first major critique, which is that the very form of this document is actually a rhetorical trick. He calls it a deception of form.
How so? Like, what does the document actually look like?
Well, the text is formatted explicitly as a manifesto. It uses these very short, forceful sentences, a really sententious tone, and a numbering system that clearly mimics, like a religious catechism, or even more pointedly, the Federalist Papers.
Oh, interesting. So trying to borrow that foundational American authority.
Exactly. I mean, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay use those numbered sections to systematically defend the creation of the U.S. Constitution. But the critical difference that Benegas highlights here is that in the Federalist, every single number represented a highly structured argument.
Right, they actually had to convince people.
Yeah, they laid out premises, demonstrated logical development, and reached a clear conclusion. You could follow their reasoning and, actually debate it.
Whereas Palantir provides zero arguments or proofs. It's just a list of maxims.
Just declarations.
Yeah, they are throwing out these definitive statements and basically demanding blind belief. It's almost like an attempt to present themselves as the second coming of the American spirit, but not through any sort of intellectual weight or democratic debate, just through hardware and, corporate posturing.
And that format sets up what Benegas calls the totalitarian trap of the implicit we.
The implicit we.
Right. So throughout the document, you constantly see phrases like, we must rebel, or we must applaud, or references to defending our civilization. The trap is adopting this first-person plural that speaks for absolutely everyone, but actually represents no one.
Wait, okay, hold on. When someone says, we're going to get lunch, I know exactly who we is, right? It's the people standing in the room. Here, it sounds like someone is volunteering me to pay the lunch bill without ever actually asking if I'm hungry.
That is exactly it. You are swept up into the action without giving your consent. In political philosophy, this really echoes what Rousseau called the general will, which later critics people like Benjamin Constant and Friedrich Hayek identified as the literal root of modern totalitarianism.
Oh, wow, because it assumes everyone is just on board by default.
Yes, it's the really dangerous idea that there is this pre-existing collective will out there, and some unelected entity can just step up, decipher it, and speak for everyone without any actual accountability to the public.
Because Palantir has no electoral mandate.
None. You can't vote them out of office. Yet they construct this we to prescribe what everyone else in society should do.
But, I mean, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Isn't a unified, implicit we somewhat necessary when we were talking about massive concepts like national defense and civilization? Like, you kind of need a collective identity to protect a nation, don't you?
You definitely do need a collective identity. But Benegas points out that to maintain a unified, unquestioning we without getting democratic consent, you inherently need a clear enemy to define yourself against.
Ah, okay. The old us versus them dynamic.
Exactly. And that brings us directly to how Palantir talks about the rest of the world in this document.
Right, because the manifesto constantly talks about adversaries and the era of deterrence and, maintaining the balance of power. But Benegas flags something really terrifying here, which is that the document never actually names, defines, or explains who the enemy is.
And that omission of a specific enemy is structurally crucial. I mean, think of how a conventional war works. A defined enemy has actual limits. If you know who you are fighting, you can eventually negotiate with them.
Or you defeat them on a battlefield.
Right, or you just sign a peace treaty. But an abstract, unnamed enemy is permanent. It is infinitely expandable.
Crucially, the enemy is classifiable by whoever holds the data. If Palantir is the entity defining what a threat looks like through their algorithms, and they are the company selling the tools to detect that threat.
They've created a perfectly closed loop.
Yeah, an endless loop?
Let's actually break down how that loop functions mechanically, because this is where the danger becomes very concrete. Imagine an algorithm is deployed to predict insurgency or, say, track behavioral anomalies. The system looks at historical data and flags a specific region or a specific demographic profile as high risk.
Okay, so the authorities see that and send more surveillance drones or police resources to that specific area.
Exactly. And because there are more eyes, more sensors, and more patrols in that area, they inevitably record more activities. It could be minor infractions or simply just an increased baseline of data, but those incidents generate new data points.
Which feeds right back into the machine.
Yes. That new data feeds directly back into the algorithm, which then computes the increased activity as validation. The algorithm essentially says, look, I was right. This area is high risk. It creates the very reality it claims to be predicting.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy powered by math.
Yeah, powered by math and corporate contracts.
So the enemy is just whoever their algorithms point to on any given day. As Benegas notes, and he draws a really stark parallel to Orwell's 1984, here today the enemy is one group, tomorrow it's another group. A nameless war is an endless war.
And for a company that sells surveillance and AI to governments, endless war means endless business. They have a massive structural financial interest in ensuring the threat never fully disappears.
Which makes their stance on ethics in this manifesto so unsettling. The Palantir document actively dismisses ethical dilemmas. They literally refer to ethical debates as a luxury and theatrical debates that our adversaries just won't pause for.
Yeah, it's the total eradication of ethics as a foundational pillar of civilization. Benegas argues this is a huge regression. It's viewing ethics merely as a disadvantage in a war of all against all, rather than, the very thing that makes civilization worth defending in the first place.
It's like writing a blank check for pest control, but the exterminator gets to decide what counts as a bug.
That's a great way to put it.
They're basically telling you, don't worry about the chemicals we're spraying all over your house. Debating toxicity is just a theatrical luxury. But if ethics are just a luxury that gets in the way of safety, what exactly is Palantir proposing to replace the Founding Fathers' philosophy with?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Benegas argues that what Palantir is proposing is fundamentally different from classic crony capitalism.
How so?
A traditional oligarch just wants government contracts, right? Tax exemptions, favorable regulations. They want to skim from the budget. But Palantir wants something vastly more profound. They want to be the cognitive infrastructure of the state. They want to be the apparatus that actually decides how reality is processed.
The cognitive infrastructure. That means they don't just want to provide the tools for the government to think. They want to be the government's brain.
Exactly. And the classical Republican tradition going all the way back to Cicero and up through James Madison built the idea of the res publica, the public thing, specifically to protect citizens from unlimited power.
Because whether that power was a king or a standing army or a private corporation, the republic belonged to the public.
Right. And Benegas points out the deep irony here. Palantir proposes that a private corporation with absolutely no transparency and no mechanism for public removal should somehow be the ultimate guardian of the republic.
But wait, if Palantir wants to act as the central brain of the state, haven't we seen this movie before? I mean, history is littered with central planners who thought they could manage society from the top down.
Oh, completely. And Benegas brings in the economist and philosopher Friedrich Hayek to explain exactly why this always ends in disaster.
Ah, Hayek.
Yeah, Hayek famously identified a fatal flaw in 20th century political thought, which he called rationalist constructivism.
Rationalist constructivism. Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It was basically the illusion shared by Soviet central planners and fascist technocrats alike. It's this arrogant belief that a central actor, whether that's a committee or a dictator, can gather enough data about society's immense complexity to make the correct decisions on behalf of everyone, overriding individual human choice.
Right. Think about how central planning failed historically. A committee in some distant capital tried to set the price and production quota for millions of everyday goods like shoes or bread.
And they calculated what they thought the population needed based on this top-down data.
But they couldn't account for changing tastes, local variations, or just individual choices. The result was always massive shortages of things people actually wanted and warehouses full of things they didn't.
Exactly. And Palantir looks at those historical failures and essentially thinks, well, the previous planners just didn't have fast enough computers or good enough algorithms.
But that entirely misses the point, doesn't it?
It misses the actual core of the problem, yeah. It was never a problem of lacking enough computing power or data collection. It was a problem of human agency. A massive computer system can process all the variables in an economy, sure, but it can't replace the millions of individual human wills that actually give that data meaning in the first place.
Because your choice today to buy one product over another or to attend a specific political rally, that tells a story of what just happened. Your choice tomorrow doesn't even exist yet for an algorithm to process.
Exactly. The individual creates the data through free will. Palantir wants the data to manage the individual.
And that's a complete inversion of how liberal democracy is supposed to function. Democracy operates on the assumption that no one person or entity knows enough to run everything.
Right. That's why we have markets, laws, public deliberation, separation of powers, and a free press. It's all designed to process dispersed knowledge. Centralizing unaccountable power corrupts it cognitively first and then morally.
And Benegas spots this really implicit, terrifying social hierarchy hiding just beneath the surface of the text, right? He breaks it down into a three-tier system.
Yeah, the three tiers are fascinating. So at the very top, you have the technological elite. They are the ones with the vision, operating completely without ethical restrictions because they genuinely believe they are acting for the good of all.
They view themselves as like post-ideological.
Right, because they possess the ultimate data tools.
Yes.
So they think they've moved past politics.
Okay, and then in the middle layer, you have the state and the professional military cadres. But their job isn't to think or debate. Their job is simply to execute the vision of that tech elite.
They're just the muscle.
Yeah. And the bottom layer is us, the citizens. We are the ones whose private lives are constantly monitored because we are the objects being defended. We are the ones sent to fight in those abstract wars.
And for this bottom layer, Benegas notes something incredible. Palantir's text actually prescribes religion for us.
Wait, really? Religion?
Yes, but not as a genuine spiritual journey. It's prescribed as a mechanism for cohesion, obedience, and readiness for sacrifice. It's basically the old opium for the people strategy, deployed specifically to keep the masses quiet while an AI-enlightened oligarchy runs the world.
Wow. The manifesto even recommends a universal military service, which Benegas interprets as generalizing the obligation to die for purposes defined by someone else. Because, let's be real, the CEO of Palantir isn't going to the front lines.
No, and the algorithms aren't dodging bullets either.
Right. The whole system is designed so that the implicit we remains safe, and apparently we are safest when we are at war.
It is a stunningly bleak vision of societal roles.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's try to visualize it. It sounds exactly like a smart thermostat for society.
A smart thermostat.
Yeah, so a normal thermostat reads the temperature of the room and reacts, right? But this Palantir system doesn't just read the room. It decides how hot you should feel, locks the dial so you can't touch it, and then tells you to be grateful you aren't freezing to death.
That is a perfect analogy.
But, and again, playing devil's advocate here, look at the speed of the world today. Cyber attacks happen in milliseconds. Hypersonic weapons can cross oceans in minutes. We literally don't have time for a slow democratic debate when the power grid is actively under attack. So doesn't modern security absolutely demand this kind of massive data centralization?
And see, that is the exact argument the tech elite relies on. And to be fair, it makes a compelling kind of functional sense on the surface.
Right, it sounds practical.
It does. But Benegas counters that by highlighting a very critical distinction. Centralizing data for rapid defense is one thing. Centralizing values destroys the core engine of a free society.
Okay, how do we differentiate between centralizing data and centralizing values?
Well, Benegas introduces the philosopher Isaiah Berlin to explain this. Liberal democracy thrives on something called value pluralism.
Value pluralism.
Yeah. In a free society, genuine, positive values naturally conflict with one another. The classic example is freedom naturally conflicting with security.
Oh, sure. If you want absolute, perfectly sterile security, you have to accept an absolute loss of freedom. You'd have to live in a padded cell.
Exactly. And democratic politics isn't supposed to solve this tension permanently. It's supposed to constantly negotiate it. That endless, messy negotiation isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system.
But Palantir's manifesto assumes there is only one supreme good, right? National security, defined as Western civilization's power.
Right. And because they hold all the data, they believe they know the definitive scientific formula to achieve it.
Which is terrifying, because if you believe you possess the absolute algorithmic truth about what is good for society, then anyone who opposes you isn't just a citizen with a differing political view.
No, they are mathematically wrong.
Right. Opposition ceases to be a political disagreement and becomes categorized as ignorance or malice or even a disease that needs to be cured.
And that introduces the concept of mathematical authority. Think about it. In a traditional democracy, if you have an arrogant, messianic politician, you can point at them. You can mock them on late-night TV. You can organize, debate, and ultimately vote them out of office. Human arrogance has a face, which makes it vulnerable.
But you cannot argue with an algorithm.
Exactly. When a mathematical predictive model classifies a specific neighborhood or a demographic or a political group as a risk, there's no one you can ask why. You can't debate a black box.
Because the system operates with this cold, indisputable mathematical authority that our modern culture has been totally conditioned to treat as purely objective truth.
Yes. Even the analysts staring at the screens often don't know exactly how the AI weighted the thousands of variables to arrive at its conclusion. The machine flagged a threat, so the machine must be right.
So what does this all mean for you? If we follow Benegas's analysis to its absolute conclusion, under this proposed system, you are no longer a player in the game of democracy. You aren't even sitting on the bench, you're just a line of code in the background scenery.
It's a total paradigm shift.
Yeah, and Benegas makes a profound distinction here. He argues that citizens under this architecture aren't being exploited in the classic Marxist sense of, having their labor stolen. Instead, you are being indexed.
And that is the crux of the erasure of political agency. Your political voice isn't being violently repressed by a dictator's secret police kicking down your door. It is simply rendered technically irrelevant.
Because the system doesn't require your vote or your debate or your consent to govern you anymore. It only needs your behavioral data to feed its predictive models.
Right. Your individual human experience, your hopes, your unique context, your political dissent. It is not treated as an error that the state needs to correct. It's treated as mere statistical noise that the algorithm just filters out to find the broader pattern.
Which is incredibly bleak. But Benegas argues that the most terrifying aspect of this entire structure isn't that the people building it are like comic book villains who actively want to oppress the world.
No, it's the exact opposite. They think they are the good guys. Benegas concludes his essay with a deeply chilling observation about sincerity. He notes that Alex Karp likely believes every single word he writes. He almost certainly views himself as a staunch patriot defending the West.
And that sincerity is precisely what makes the situation so incredibly dangerous.
Right, because a cynical, corrupt politician knows they are doing something wrong, which means they actually have an internal break. They know when to stop before the public revolts.
But a true believer, armed with mathematical certainty and massive data, lacks any capacity for self-criticism. When power is utterly convinced of its own virtue, it recognizes absolutely no limits.
If you truly believe you are saving civilization itself, any level of surveillance or control is inherently justified. The end always justifies the technological means.
Which leads perfectly to the final, unforgettable metaphor Benegas uses in his essay. He warns that the most dangerous moment in the history of political thought isn't the tyrannical moment when power steps up and says, "I am power and I will make you obey."
Because we know how to fight that. We have centuries of experience rebelling against tyrants.
Exactly. The truly perilous moment is when power steps forward and softly says, "I am a service, and I will care for you, I will protect you."
And that's when we must remember the reality of the pastoral metaphor. The shepherd spends his entire life watching over the flock, caring for the sheep, protecting them from the wolves.
But the shepherd only does this because, eventually, he intends to eat them.
It is a profound shift from a system that governs free citizens to a system that simply administers a flock.
And if we are indeed moving into a world where our political agency is quietly being replaced by algorithmic indexing, a world where our actions are predicted before they even happen, rather than our voices actually being heard, how do you prove to a machine that your individual, messy, beautiful human experience is something more than just noise in the data?
That is the question of our era.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this incredibly complex exploration today. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.